Pretty much every update in old school RuneScape is decided by player polls. So imagine for a second if Jagex went around those polls and added the most accurate weapon in the game, despite it failing the polls many times. Well, you don't need to imagine, because they did. The Vesta's Longsword, or VLS for short, is an item originally created in 2008, long before old school. It was part of the Vesta's equipment set, one of the 4 Ancient Warriors armor sets, all of which were designed for PKing. At the time, this gear was considered extremely powerful and could only be earned by PKing on the newly added PvP worlds. Actually, you know what? It wasn't just considered powerful, it was powerful. So much so that 2 versions of the VLS existed. One you could use for 15 minutes, and one you could use for an hour, neither of which could be repaired. When time was up, it would just disappear. Even after an oversight from Jagex that allowed PvP armor and weapons to enter the game at an excessive rate, the VLS still retained its value. But that's mainly because of its special attack, although I can't find an exact formula for it because the wiki was not nearly as good in 2008 as it is today. More or less, on average, you would hit 20% higher with it, it was more accurate on players in high defense gear, and only needed 25% of your special attack energy. Plus, it was one-handed, so you could wear a defender with it to increase your accuracy even more, unlike the other 2 popular KO weapons at the time, Dragon Claws and the Armadyl Godsword. At its peak, the hour-long variant of the VLS was worth 50 million GP on the Grand Exchange. That's insane for something that lasts an hour. As you can imagine, this weapon was both loved and feared by PKers. As with most popular RuneScape 2 content, it eventually made its way into the minds of old school's developers, but not for the main game. Deadman mode is a seasonal version of RuneScape focused around who the best PKers in the game are, or really, who's the best DDoSer. To spice things up, in autumn of 2018's Deadman Finals, the team introduced all of the Ancient Warriors weapons. All you had to do to earn one was kill NPCs in the wilderness and hope you got lucky. This time, the VLS wouldn't degrade at all, and we were given a more exact formula. Its special attack still only cost 25% of your energy, the accuracy of it would be based on 25% of your opponent's defense, so the higher their defense, the higher chance you'll hit, and it would hit anywhere from 20% to 120% of your max hit. So for high-level players, it would hit like a truck, an incredibly accurate truck. As you can see from the clips I'm playing on screen, it was incredibly difficult to escape this thing. It made the finals super exciting, and while I was researching for this video, watching all these VLS PKing videos, I did the Pog emote in real life so many times.
I mean, I hear myself saying it and I want to cringe.
Although many players considered the VLS overpowered, it was a really fun weapon to use and entertaining to watch. As a result, in the next Deadman season, it returned, along with the rest of the Ancient Warriors weapons. Plus, for the first time ever in old school, the Ancient Warriors armor. All the hype around it planted an idea in the dev team's mind. What if we brought this gear to the main game? When the team started working on the long-awaited Wilderness Rejuvenation 2 poll, they wanted to include the Ancient Warriors somehow. They chose to pull every armor set as a drop from Revenants in the Wilderness, but chose not to include the weapons as the team thought they'd be too hard to balance. A few days later, every set failed the polls by about 10%. Jagex repolls them again a week or so later, this time as one question with a few tweaks, and they fail again by a similar margin. A lot of people like to blame the failure of this poll on why Jagex just turned the Revenant cave drops into basically a money printer, but I don't think that's fair. I think we all know why it was a money printer. So about 2 years go by, and the VLS is largely forgotten about for a while, until Jagex announces the rework of the Bounty Hunter minigame for the 3rd time. Bounty Hunter 2 was teased at 2017's RuneFest, 2018's RuneFest, and finally, in 2019, a design blog for it was posted. So, for background, Bounty Hunter 1 was added to the game back in 2014. For those that never got the chance to play it, it was a PvP minigame where players would be assigned a random target, you'd track them down, and kill them, and receive emblems as a reward. The more kills you got without dying, the higher emblem tier you'd receive. receive. You could exchange these emblems for points and buy things like armor, supplies, looting bags, and item recolors. It was really cool, but it was pretty bare bones and not very rewarding. So in 2019, Jagex finally reworked the minigame. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but the main point was reworking how the Bounty Hunter shop worked. In Bounty Hunter 2, you'd now receive points for killing your target, getting kill streaks, or completing a task like kill your target without praying protect item, or stop harassing JMods on Twitter for 10 minutes. Now with these points, you could purchase gear, teletabs, recolors, and so on like last time. This time, however, supplies were moved out of the regular shop and into a new item called Bounty Hunter Crates. Crates would cost 5 points, and you could receive supplies and items worth anywhere from a few thousand GP to tens of millions. Jagex wanted to offer the Vesta's longsword and every other ancient warrior's weapon as a possible reward from these crates. But to address the complaints that the VLS was overpowered, they would also be changing the special attack energy requirement from 25% to 35%. So much for being too hard to balance, huh? Unlike Deadman mode, this time the weapons would be degradable, but they could be recharged. The poll also gave options that asked if players would like them to be usable against NPCs in the wilderness, and another question on if they should be usable outside of the wilderness. Every question failed pretty miserably, with most sitting at around a 60% yes vote. So Bounty Hunter 2 launches, and it's generally pretty well received. A few changes and tweaks are made here and there, and it remains fairly active, but it has a big problem growing in the background. It's incredibly easy to farm kills. With just 3 accounts, you could make millions per hour abusing the game's mechanics. Once bot makers caught on, bot farms obviously became a huge problem too. Seemingly half of the Bounty Hunter world's player bases were just bots. So on January 23rd, 2020, Jagex just shuts down the minigame entirely, with the reasoning of, hey, we're just gonna improve the minigame, kill boosting, and open it back up in a few months. And they did just that. In April 2020, Bounty Hunter returned with a bunch of changes and new rewards. But surprise, one new reward is the Vesta's longsword, but renamed to Blighted Vesta's longsword. See, it's different. Something else different about it is there was no poll, no nothing. It was just in the game now. This time around, the VLS would only be usable on Bounty Hunter worlds, even on NPCs in the wilderness. It wouldn't degrade, was untradeable, and the cherry on top, each special attack would once again only need 25% of your energy. However, even if you had enough points to buy one, you'd also need 50 million GP to activate it. If someone killed you and you lost your VLS, they'd get 50 mil instead of the sword. So it wasn't cheap to get. That last point aside, obviously players were outraged. This set a new standard that if Jagex wants, they can go against the polling system and just add whatever they want, even something that's failed multiple times. It didn't help that most of Reddit considered this weapon extremely overpowered. But how did it actually perform? Well, I'm not a PKer. Trying to PK turns me into Monmat K trying to power mine.
A bit of technique in there as well.
But someone who does know about PKing is Kemp Q, so he helped me out with understanding this thing. First of all, the special attack offers the highest accuracy in the game, outside of things like the dark bow and bone crossbow. In low defense fights, this thing is not great. You're really better off with a dragon dagger, but with opponents who have high defense, it absolutely slaps. With a 25% special attack energy drain, you can use it quite a lot too. However, plain and simple, the Armadyl Godsword is just better when it comes to getting a kill. Even with an Avernic Defender, the VLS has 12% less of a max hit than the AGS, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot. So if you want the best shot at getting that last big hit or two to finish off a kill, you'd want to be using an AGS. Overall, the VLS is the best weapon in the game for damage per second against moderate to high defense opponents, but using it to KO people is unlikely. quickly. Now, I'm not saying the VLS isn't an absolutely terrifying weapon to go up against. It's just perhaps not as broken as a lot of people perceive it to be. So if it's not meta or game breaking, why all the backlash? First of all, it was unpolled, so that leaves a really sour taste in everyone's mouth. But besides that, it's one more very strong weapon that PKers now have in their arsenal. A very accurate one at that, albeit only on bounty hunter worlds. Many players also felt that it wasn't fair that you'd be punished for wearing higher defense armor, as the VLS would hit on them more consistently. Which, of course, leads to the issue of players who wear near worthless gear, aside from a powerful weapon like the VLS, and try to get a quick kill with it on someone who is risking a lot more. I think the most important point to make though is at this point, most people's experience with the VLS was only in the Deadman mode finals. Since the finals were all fights seeing who could last the longest, the VLS was absolutely in its element. So it makes sense why many people might see it as extremely overpowered. I'm sure there's more valid reasons out there as to why people didn't want it in Bounty Hunter, but those were the main points I came across. Now, the problems for the VLS weren't over yet. It turns out all the anti-bot and anti-point farming systems that Jagex put in place for Bounty Hunter just didn't work. Rather than try and fix it again, 8 months later, they just flat out removed the Bounty Hunter reward shop and renamed the Bounty Hunter worlds to Target worlds, effectively killing the minigame entirely. Imagine if Jagex did that with literally anything else. So yeah, Chambers of Xeric has too many gold farmers and we don't know how to fix it. You can still play it, but we've removed any of the rare items. So, with Bounty Hunter gone, the VLS was now a completely useless trinket. That 50 mil activation fee and hours of point grinding was now all for nothing. You can still buy one today, as it was moved to the last man standing shop, but it's still useless. A bit of an awkward position to be in. So much so that Mod Sween posted publicly saying that he regrets how the whole situation was handled. But Jagex couldn't just leave the VLS how it was. They needed some kind of solution. The weapon was now in the game, and those who owned it wanted to use it. So they ran a new poll, this time exclusively for PKers. Players who had earned kills on PvP worlds in the previous few months would be the only ones eligible to vote. The poll asked if it should be possible to use the VLS on PvP worlds, but only on other players. It would lose all of its bonuses when used against NPCs. This poll, of course, outraged the community again. They thought that slowly but surely, the VLS would creep its way from Bounty Hunter to PvP worlds and then into regular worlds. Well, even though the poll was PKer exclusive, it still failed, barely. It had a 74.6% yes vote, meaning it didn't pass by 12 or 13 votes. Every time a controversial poll comes out, you see people shouting, "That's it! I'm getting the ults!" They log in with their extra accounts and just vote the way they want the poll to go. With how many alts PKers have with all their different account builds, I have no doubt that probably one person and their alts tipped the tide of this vote, causing it to just barely fail. But this time, Jagex listened to the poll, and the VLS is still useless today outside of the now abandoned Target worlds. But this isn't the last we'll hear of the VLS. I have little doubt that it'll make a reappearance in a near-miss poll sometime in the future. It'll likely have an easier time passing too, now that the threshold has been lowered to 70%. Even though, in my eyes, it already passed last time, so it'll be exciting to see what happens. But not as exciting as a train wreck that you just can't look away from. Jagex's Twitch Prime PvP tournament was a complete disaster, and I promise you won't be able to keep your eyes off it in the video on the right.